Thank you for joining today. I hope you're all doing well and safe. In today's webinar, I'll go over the 10 do's and don'ts for administering a call on CaFÉ. Some of these are handy tricks to keep you organized, some stem from common mistakes that we've seen, and some are just some friendly reminders on how to best administer a call for entry. So the key items that we will cover include selecting the correct jury type for your call, outlining the call requirements and the custom form questions, some best practices to use before, during, and after the jury process, and using reports to help keep you organized. All right, let's get started with our first tip. So, one of the first decisions you make when requesting a new call is deciding on the jury type. CaFÉ has two options, jury by artwork and jury by artist / application. These two options allow you to host many different kinds of calls that may need to be scored differently. Since choosing the correct jury type impacts the overall workflow for both you and your jurors, the first tip we have is don't choose the wrong jury type for your call. So I've made this comparison chart here to walk you through it as I describe the two jury types. The first row here shows you the definition that is given on the new call form you fill out for each call. So here you can see that jury by artwork or scoring by art is where each upload is scored independently. And when I say upload, I mean work sample. So that's audio, image, or video. Jury by artist, or as we have scoring by application, is where all uploads, aka work samples, are scored as a group. To explain the types a little bit more, you can see in the next row here, jury by artwork mean the samples, so image, audio, and video, are separated into individual entries. And the example here shows that, let's say an artist uploads 5 images or 5 videos or audio files, that will equal 5 separate entries. On the other hand, jury by artist or application means that the work samples are all grouped together into one entry. So if an artist submits 5 files, that will equal 1 entry. So in the next row, calls best suited for jury by artwork calls, and this is not an exhaustive list, it's just the most common ones. These are things such as exhibitions or competitions, or any events in which you know that specific pieces of art are being selected and therefore need to be scored separately. So calls best suited for jury by artist calls are ones such as requests for qualifications, requests for proposals, residencies, and this is where the body of work is scored as 1 to determine which artists are selected. That being said, there is another exception to the jury by artist calls. When it comes to 3D artwork, some like to have multiple view images of the same piece. So in this case, jury by artist might help because you'd want those images that are all of the same piece to be grouped together and scored 1 score for the entire group of images. So that is something to keep in mind. And so there are some nuances to it, but I will show you one more thing before we move on. The scorecard here, you can see what it looks like to the jurors when they score. On the left here, jury by artwork means that each image, even if it's from the same artist, we've got the same artist with 2 different pieces here, each will have its own scorecard and each will be assigned its own score. So this image will receive a score and this image will receive a score. Whereas on the right, jury by artist, all of the images are grouped together on the 1 scorecard and the entire group of artwork receives 1 score. There are nuances to how the jury types are selected or can be used, but I hope this gives you a good understanding of the differences and helps you understand that this is an important choice to make, and it's always good to double check that you've selected the right one, which is the decision you make on the call information form you fill out. So once you start receiving applications, you can't go back and make changes, so it's important to select the right one. And if you have any doubt about the jury type or need help deciding which one to choose, feel free to reach out to us because we can gather info about what you're looking for your call and help you determine the best jury type. All right, our next tip is to make sure that you do include a complete prospectus in your call description. We have a call information form demo here for you. Not only will this help potential applicants know the details of your call and or event, they will be able to find out if they are eligible to apply. Some key components that are best to include are the call summary. So this will briefly describe the nature of your call. The exhibition dates, which will be up here. The deadline date will be up here, but sometimes it's good to have your exhibition dates in here as well. Artist eligibility, so like the membership requirement, age or location requirement, or if it's for a specific medium, you would have those there too. Also have your entry fee information. There is the entry fee up here. But if you have kind of a complex system, or if you have any coupon codes or something that you include on your call description, you want to make sure you include that. You also want to include the selection process description if you know that the dates that you will be notifying and reviewing the artwork, notifying the artist. And some other things you can include are like shipping information or when they need to drop off their artwork. Any COVID-19 specific information is really good right now, showing that you have a backup plan in case your event is canceled, or if you have any plans for online exhibitions. It's really important to have that info. And then some additional contact information or sources for additional info, anything that the artist can use to get in contact with you if they have a question, or if you have some, additional things that they might be interested in. So there's much more information that you can include in your call description. And while you don't want to overload the description with text that some artists don't even read, it's best to have all of the relevant information that would help the artist determine if they are eligible and interested in the event before applying to it. We've seen several cases of artists withdrawing their application because they were not eligible or could not participate in the event. This is sometimes due to the artist not reading the full description, but sometimes it's due to the requirements not being outlined. So now that we've covered what to include in your long description, I'll show you how to enter it in CaFÉ. So we'll go to CaFÉ here and select our call. And as you probably already know, the call description can be found in the call editor under the event information tab. Here you'll see the two CK editor text boxes. One is for your short description. This is what will be seen on the call listings page before they click on the call. And then once the artist clicks for more info or to apply to it, then they see this long description that you include here. You can expand this if you need more space. The call editor here has some basic formatting tools. You've got bold, italic, underline, you can number or do bullet points. You can also copy and paste your information directly into this text box. Just know that the formatting might not copy correctly, so you'll just have to go through and make sure that it looks the way you want it to look. Once you're done editing, just be sure to click Save here at the bottom. In fact, you'll want to save as often as you can when you're working on this to be sure that you're not being timed out, or if you walk away, the system will time you out after 30 minutes. So you'll want to make sure that you click save often, and typing on this page here won't count as activity, so you'll need to click somewhere or something so you won't get timed out. But best case scenario is always just to click save. So having a clear description is the best way to avoid confusion for artists, and will ensure they know how to apply to your call. This will avoid problems down the road. If you attended last month's webinar, this next reminder will be familiar to you. When it comes to writing out your custom questions on the application editor, one common mistake is not writing out the question. This leads to a blank application that the artists do not know how to fill out because they don't know what the questions are. When you build out your question in the application editor tab here, you will give it a title. But this title in this first column here is only internal and only can be seen by you. and it's not the question for the artist. So if you fill out your questions and you stop here, only having a title, the question will be blank and the artist will not know what to answer. Or they won't know what file to upload, and so on. I'll actually show you here from our demo artist application. This is an application where the form questions were not built out. The questions weren't written. And you can see here that, except for the artist statement, these questions are missing. So you can't tell what to do, not sure what file to upload. This causes some confusion for artists. So that's what that looks like when it's not done correctly. To write the question, what you'll need to do is when you create a new one, you either click Build New Question or you click Media Requirements, or not Media Requirements, you select Edit. I'm going to click Media Requirements. You select Edit. And this first text box here is where you'll write the question out. This one's an informational only. I can go back and show you one. Let's see. This checkbox answer. So this is where you actually wrote the question. This is the title, just Hear About Us. That's just so I can reference what the question is. But this is where I actually wrote out the question. How did you hear about us? This second text box here is additional information that you can provide, and that will appear as a help bubble on the application. So if they click the help bubble, they'll see that additional information. But you don't need to fill that out if you don't have additional info. You just need to make sure you click or you type out the question in this text box. Always be sure to click Update Question to make sure you're saving that change. So another mistake that some administrators run into is activating the categories editor when they don't intend to use categories. The categories allow you to organize the entries based on a criteria of your choice. This could be the medium, location, anything else. If you activate categories, you must have at least 2 categories for the function to work properly. If you have it set to active but don't have any categories written out, 2 things will happen. First, artists will have trouble submitting their application because it will require them to choose a category and there will be none to choose from. This means they won't be able to submit their entry. Secondly, if categories are activated before the jury process and no categories are actually made, the jurors will not be able to see the scorecard. This is because the system will try to list the entries to sort it by category, but will have no categories to pull from, and it'll end up being blank. So you'll want to make sure, tip number 4, that you don't activate the categories editor when you don't intend to use them. Instead, if you don't want to use them, click Disabled and click Go. You don't use the Save option to save this categories box, you just click Go. So that's one handy trick that we run into often. The system's a little bit particular when it comes to certain rules of how the back-end system works. So this is one of those things where if it's set to active with no categories, it'll essentially kind of break certain processes. Our 5th tip is that you want to make sure that you do preview the call before going live. Previewing the call means previewing both the call description and the application custom questions to make sure everything is in order. To preview the call description, you'll click on the Event Information tab here for the call editor. You'll go to the bottom and you'll click this, Preview Application Description. This will pull up the call description as it will be seen by the artist. And just as we talked about, you want to make sure that you've included all the information you need, that it looks the way you want, and how you want it to be presented. Next, you'll preview your custom questions by going to the application editor again. You'll click Preview Application Questions, and here you'll be able to see a preview. It's not the actual application, you're not logged in or anything. Preview of what the application will look like to the artist. So not only do you want to make sure you have your questions written out, like we've already talked about, you'll want to check the order of the questions if you care about the order. Some folks do. And you want to make sure that you have the correct question type for the information you're collecting. For example, making sure that you have the choose file upload option for a resume or a proposal document, as opposed to just having a text box. Previewing here will ensure that you have the application set up the way you want, so the artists don't miss giving you any materials you need. So this tip might sound obvious, but it's a common mistake for some. When it comes to setting up your jury settings, you want to make sure that you don't hide the artwork from the jury. This happens under the jury permission settings of the Jury Administration tab. So jury permissions here allow you to hide certain parts of the application to the juror. You can hide the artist's names, the resume, or any other custom form questions that you don't want to be considered by the jurors. You can also use this to clean up the scorecard so that information only pertinent to the event and not to their consideration is hidden. The important thing here to remember is that the checkboxes that you see here are indicating which items will be hidden. Some mistake the checkboxes as parts they want to show, and they check off all the ones they want, and this is where they often check the artist art checkbox. So this means when the juror goes to score the entries, they will not be able to view their images, they just won't see anything. So if you hear from your jurors that they're seeing a blank or a black screen or something when they pull up the scorecard, the first thing you'll want to check is this jury permission setting and make sure that you only have the things that you want to hide, and you want to make sure that the artist art is unchecked. Artist art is a setting that you might not think that needs to be hidden, but in some written competitions that are being used on CaFÉ, it's just not important that they have the image component, so we have that option available. Just make sure that you click that, and if you ever make changes, just be sure to click Save Changes here, and you'll be good to go. Speaking of having the jurors score the entries, our next tip is to make sure that you have the jurors assign a score to all of the entries. So there are different methods for scoring. People like to choose different ones, so you can score differently. You can score yes, no, maybe, or use 1 through 7 or 1 through 20. And some jurors just like to go through and score, only assigning scores to the ones that they want to select. However, it'll be important for you later in the process that each entry does have its own score. So to explain this more, I will go over the process quickly of sorting those applications to the not invited and the invited status. So we've got some scored entries here, and I will show you this process and show you how it will be affected by entries that aren't given scores. So let's say the jurors scored all the entries and you're ready to move on. The next thing you'll want to do is change the status of the lower scored applications to the not invited status. And by doing this, you'll first go to step 2 here and click Change App Status. On this page, you'll first select all of the categories. You can do them separately if you'd like. And then you'll set this threshold here. So you can think of the threshold as like a cutoff score. So any entry scored lower than the threshold will be removed, which also means just being moved to the not invited status. For example, if I want the entries with a score of 4 or higher to move to the next round, that means I want the entries below 4 to be changed to not invited. So I'll set my removal threshold to 4. Anything below 4, not invited. 4 and above, moving on. Then I'll click, this is where our tip comes in. So let's say your juror only scored the entries that they want to keep for the exhibition, and they left some of the entries blank. Those entries without a score will be left out of this process because this average score here and any of the score won't be taken into account for blank scores. So you won't be able to change the status in this step if they don't have a score. You'll have to do it manually, which if you have a lot of entries will not be fun. But if the juror scores all the entries, all you have to do is plug in your cutoff and you're going to be removing or moving all the statuses to the right, entry to the right status. So to complete this process here, I'll just click Update. You'll see that these numbers have changed based off the cutoff score. And then I'll click Preview. Preview, I can see here that all of the scores below 4 are the ones that are going to be not invited. And to make the change, I'll click Not Invited and confirm. And if you're ever worried, just know we can reverse this step, so it's not as scary as it looks. So now let's assume that I don't need another round and I've narrowed down my entries enough. The next step will be going to step 3 to finalize the jury. And I'm going to click Final Selection. This step simply moves all of the remaining entries to the invited status. First, I'll do the same and select my categories. And here I'm going to leave my threshold at 0 because I'm simply moving all of the entries. So anything above a 0, moving on. Then I don't need to click Update because it's already been updated, but I'll click Preview and I'll check. So anything 4 and above are going to be invited. Then I'll click Invited to make the change and we'll be all set. So when I return to this jury administration page, you can see that there still says there are 3 applications being judged. At the bottom, you'll see these entries, and you'll notice that there's no scores given to them. This means they weren't included in either step of moving them to invited or not invited because there was no score being taken into account. This is why you want your jurors to score all the entries. However, let's just say I know these entries are not going to be invited, so I can actually just from this page choose the not invited status from the drop-down menu. And I'll just click Save Change. And now there are 0 applications being judged. Those are where they need to be, and you're all set. But if you have to do that for hundreds of entries, you'll want to make sure instead that your juror scores all of the entries. Don, you ask, what happens if a jury member does not score all of the 100 of 190 artists? So if they don't score all of it, they will need to if you don't know what they intend to do with them. So all of the scored entries will be included in these steps to sort those. And if there's any left without a score, you will have to know from the jury. Let's say the juror tells you, well, I don't want those invited. Then you can either go what I just showed you here by changing the status, or you can go back to your events management page. And if there's still any left in that received status, then you can go to this and change it to not invited or invited manually. But that just means you have to know from your juror what they intend to do. If they don't score all of them and you don't know what they intend to do with them, you'll have to have them go back and score the remaining entries. Amy, your question, does yes, no, maybe use a threshold as well? The answer is yes. Yes, no, maybe is a scoring that is assigned a number. So yes is a 3, no is a 1, and maybe is a 2. So let's say you want to go to change app status and change the entries, and you want to have your removal threshold. You want the next step to keep all of the yeses and the maybes. So to do that, you want to know that the yeses, which are 3s, and the maybes, which are 2s, will move forward. So 2 will be your cutoff score. Anything below a 2, which means all of the no's, will be moved to not invited. So if you do that, it'll be the threshold will be 2. If you want to get rid of the maybes, you'll set it at 3. So only all the 3s, only all the yeses will move forward. So the next step in the call process, and our next tip for you, is to make sure that you do notify all of the artists of the jury results. This means notifying both the not invited and the invited batches of artists. I won't spend too much time going over this process, but to do this, you'll want to go to the Events Communication tab. And when you email your not invited artists, you'll click the not invited checkbox, click Select, and you'll fill out the email form. You'll include your message, letting the artist know that they were not selected. And then once you're done, you click preview to preview the message and then send. You'll then repeat this process for the invited batch. It's important to notify all of the artists for a number of reasons. First of all, it's just good practice to let all of the artists know the status of their entry because they took the time to apply and to pay the entry fees. Secondly, if your call is juried by individual pieces and if artists have multiple, it's important to send emails to both groups so artists are aware of which pieces were invited and which pieces were not invited. And since the email lists the titles of the works and their status in the email, you don't want them to be confused. Notifying everyone is the best way to ensure there's no confusion. Although I do always recommend including in your message here that if they have any questions about their status, they can first refer to their My CaFÉ entries page. This is because that page will show them the status, and so they'll be able to see which artwork is listed as what status. Just make sure your jury status is set to complete, so the statuses are visible. And we'll swing right into the next tip because speaking of jury statuses, that's our next tip, which is don't forget to set the jury status to complete and check the correct settings. So this happens on the jury administration page. After you notify the artist of the results, you'll go back here and you'll change the jury status to complete. And you'll click Save Changes. This step does two things. First, it makes the status of the entries visible, like I said, to the artist from their My CaFÉ entries page. The artist can then go back to the page to confirm which pieces were invited or not invited. Secondly, this step allows the artist to archive their entries. Artists may need to archive their entries to clean up their portfolio or to make changes to their image details. This is something they cannot do until they have the ability to archive their applications. Another setting that goes along with this is the do not allow artists to archive setting, and you'll actually find the setting in the call editor, and it's right here. While the name of the setting recently changed, do not allow artists to archive is another setting to ensure that all artists are able to archive their entries. While this setting seems like a formality, it's important to the function of how the system works. So when you change the status of the jury status to complete, the do not allow artists to archive setting should automatically change to disabled. You can see that it did here. However, it's important to check to make sure that that did change because that will be the only way that all of the artists will be able to archive their entry. Make sure to click Save if you need to change that setting. If you make the jury status complete, can you undo this if something comes up? You can. You just have to note how much time you've left it as complete. If you know that you kind of need to go back really quickly, you can go back to in progress. And essentially what I'll do on the My CaFÉ entries page is instead of showing the status, going back to in progress will show the status as jury in progress. They don't have a status yet. So you can go back. You can't really, unless you've been in communication with an artist about undoing an artist being invited or not invited. Technically you can make that change, but you won't want to change anything after you've completed this process of notifying artists, just for industry standard reasons. So just make sure it's done. But most of the actions in CaFÉ can be reversed if you are in communication with folks. All right, so our final tip of the day is that we suggest you do use the income breakdown report to track entry fee revenue for your call. The income breakdown report is an itemized list of artist purchases, transactions with dates, fee types, and it lists if coupons were used. If you collect entry fees for your call, you'll want to be familiar with this report for your accounting needs. So to go to this, you'll go to Reports, and then you'll go to Income Breakdown. You'll select your date range here. This call was older, so I'm going to go older into this call. And you'll hide any of the things that you don't want to see. So if you have entry fees, you'll want to hide the $0 transactions since it won't be applicable. And you can filter any of these options, select your call, and you click Run Report. Okay, so here, if you do have entry fees, you'll see the amounts listed and everything. You'll see the artist name, the date that they made that transaction. It'll show that they have a media fee, and it'll show them how many of the media fees. This is important because on the Events Management tab, it'll only show you if they purchased a media fee, but it won't show you how many. And so it's good to check here instead to see the total amount that they did pay. And at the bottom of this report, you'll see the totals. You'll see the credit card fees, which is that 3.25% transaction fee for all users paying by credit card. And these fees will be deducted from the remittance check. The income breakdown report can be handy whenever you need to verify whether an artist successfully completed their transaction and if the total entry fees and the media fees paid make sense. It may also help you determine how much you'll receive in your monthly remittance check. You can select the date range to just the previous month to see how much was collected for that time period. Like the other reports, you can download this in the format here. You can do a few different formats. Click download, and then you can download it here for your records. This will be helpful if you need to sort it or anything like that. Alright, that's our final tip. Make sure you use the report. And that concludes the main portion of our webinar. I hope you've learned some handy tips, and I know now know some of the mistakes that folks make that you'll want to avoid. Alright, if you have any questions about what we covered today, I'll be on the line and I'll answer some of those questions as much as we have time for. Alright, Don, you're asking if some of the judges grade all and some don't know, does that affect the scoring? I mean, it does. If you have multiple jurors and some jurors leave a score blank because they just don't know or they don't have an opinion, that's okay as long as an entry receives at least one score from one judge. So the entries that are not scored will not be scored towards the average. So let's say 3 jurors score let's say you have 3 jurors and 2 of the jurors scored a certain entry but 1 didn't. That's fine. The juror that didn't score an entry, it just won't be accounted towards their average score. It'll take the average between the 2 jurors that did score it. But if that entry does not have a single score at all, that will affect the scoring because you'll want to make sure that the entry does have a score so you know what to do with it. But as long as it has at least 1 score per entry, you'll be good to go. Okay, and I'm going to come back to you. Connie, you're hanging and displaying 60 pieces and 40 more will be virtual only. Okay. Well, virtual only. What you can do for this is you can have your invited status of all of the pieces that will be hung. But I would suggest using a different status for the ones that will be virtual only, because I'm guessing you might not know until you're done jurying which ones will be virtual and hanging. You'll decide that in that jury process. So in which case you can use, let's say, invited for all of the ones being hung, and then 40 more of them that are virtual only you can put into a different status that you choose. So you could do other. I mean, it's not the most elegant one for folks when they are looking at their status. Or if you know that you'll be organized about it, you can put it into accepted so that, and when you send them an email, you verify accepted means that you're virtual only, and invited means that you're going to be hung. That could be an option. Anything like that. I don't know if any of the other ones will actually kind of make more sense. You could do waitlist for the ones being virtual, but that kind of implies that they're on a wait list. But as long as you're emailing them and telling them that, okay, your entry will be hung, or your entry will be not hung, but we do want to feature it virtually, that's one way to go. If you want to brainstorm more with me or the team, feel free to email us. But I think that is a good start. Thank you. Thanks again for you all to joining us today. Be sure to join our next one in July.